It was a busy afternoon at a small but popular cafe in the heart of the city. The place was buzzing with customers, the sound of coffee machines hissing, and the chatter of people enjoying their meals. The cafe was known for its cozy atmosphere and friendly staff, but not everyone who worked there was as welcoming as the place itself. The manager, a man in his late 30s, was known for his short temper and rude behavior. He often snapped at his employees and even customers if things didn't go his way. He believed he was always right, and his word was the final say in the cafe. On this particular day, a woman walked into the cafe. She was dressed simply, in a plain shirt and jeans, with a small bag slung over her shoulder. She looked like any other customer, nothing out of the ordinary. She found a quiet corner table and sat down, pulling out a notebook and pen from her bag. She seemed focused, occasionally glancing around the cafe as if observing the surroundings. The manager noticed her almost immediately. He didn't like the way she sat there, not ordering anything right away. He walked over to her table, his expression stern. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his tone sharp. "This is a cafe, not a library. If you're not going to order anything, you'll have to leave." The woman looked up, surprised by his tone. She smiled politely and said, "I'm sorry, I just needed a moment to decide. I'll order something in a minute." But the manager wasn't having it. He crossed his arms and glared at her. "We have a policy here. If you're not ordering, you can't just sit here and take up space. There are paying customers waiting for tables." The woman's smile faded, but she remained calm. "I understand," she said. "I'll order right now. Can I have a cup of coffee, please?" The manager shook his head. "No. You've been sitting here for too long without ordering. You need to leave. Now." The other customers nearby started to notice the commotion. Some whispered to each other, uncomfortable with the manager's harsh tone. The woman, still calm, gathered her things and stood up. "All right," she said softly. "I'll leave. But I hope you treat your other customers with more respect." The manager scoffed and turned away, muttering under his breath as he walked back to the counter. The woman left the cafe without another word, but the incident left a strange tension in the air. The other customers exchanged uneasy glances, but no one said anything. They were used to the manager's behavior, but this time, it felt different. Little did the manager know, the woman he had just kicked out was not an ordinary customer. She was someone who could change the fate of his cafe with just a few words. But for now, she was gone, and the manager went about his day as if nothing had happened. Later that evening, as the cafe was closing, the manager received a phone call. It was from the owner of the cafe. A man who rarely visited but trusted the manager to run the place smoothly. The owner's voice was calm but serious. "I need to talk to you," he said. "Meet me at the cafe tomorrow morning. We have something important to discuss." The manager felt a knot form in his stomach. He wasn't used to being called in for meetings, especially not by the owner. He tried to brush it off, telling himself it was probably nothing. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next morning, the manager arrived at the cafe early. He unlocked the doors and turned on the lights, trying to prepare himself for whatever the owner had to say. He didn't have to wait long. The owner arrived shortly after, his expression unreadable. He walked in and sat down at one of the tables, gesturing for the manager to join him. "Do you know why I'm here?" the owner asked, his voice steady. The manager shook his head, trying to appear confident. "No, sir." "Is everything all right?" The owner leaned forward, his eyes locking onto the manager's. "Yesterday, a woman came into this cafe. She was treated very rudely and asked to leave. Do you remember that?" The manager's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected this. "Yes, I remember," he said, his voice wavering slightly. But she wasn't ordering anything. She was just sitting there, taking up space. I was following the policy. The owner's expression didn't change. That woman, he said slowly, was a food critic. One of the most respected in the city. She writes for a major publication, and her reviews can make or break a business. The manager's face turned pale. He felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. I didn't know, he stammered. She didn't say anything. She just looked like a regular customer. The owner sighed, leaning back in his chair. That's the point. She doesn't announce who she is. She comes in, observes, and writes her reviews based on her experience. And yesterday, her experience was being kicked out of our cafe because of your rudeness. The manager's mind raced. He tried to think of something to say, some way to fix this, but he came up empty. What happens now? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The owner stood up, his expression grim. Now, we wait. Her review will be published soon, and we'll see what she has to say. But I can tell you this, if her review is as bad as I think it will be, we're in serious trouble. And you, he added, pointing a finger at the manager, will have a lot to answer for. With that, the owner turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving the manager alone with his thoughts. He sat there, staring at the empty table, his mind swirling with regret and fear. He had always thought he was doing the right thing, but now, he realized just how wrong he had been. The next few days were agonizing for the manager. He tried to go about his usual routine, but the weight of what had happened hung over him like a dark cloud. He couldn't stop thinking about the woman, about how he had treated her, and about the consequences that were coming. Finally, the day arrived. The review was published, and it was every bit as bad as the owner had feared. The critic didn't hold back. She described the cafe as unwelcoming, with a manager who was rude and dismissive. She mentioned how she had been treated, how she had been kicked out simply for taking a moment to decide what to order. Her words were sharp and to the point, and they painted a picture of a cafe that no one would want to visit. The owner called the manager into his office that same day. His expression was stern, and there was no trace of the usual calm in his voice. "This is it," he said. "The review has done serious damage to our reputation. We've already had cancellations for reservations, and I've received several complaints from regular customers who are reconsidering their loyalty to us." The manager felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to apologize, to explain himself, but he knew it was too late. The damage had been done, and there was no way to undo it. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely audible. "I didn't mean for this to happen." The owner shook his head. "Sorry isn't enough. You've put this entire business at risk. I trusted you to run this place, and you've let me down. I have no choice but to let you go." The manager's heart sank. He had never expected things to go this far. He had always thought he was doing the right thing, but now, he realized just how wrong he had been. He nodded silently, knowing there was nothing more he could say. As he left the owner's office, the manager felt a wave of regret wash over him. He thought about the woman, about how he had treated her, and about the consequences of his actions. He had always thought he was in control, but now, he realized just how little control he really had. The cafe continued to struggle in the weeks that followed. The bad review had done its damage, and it would take a long time for the business to recover. The manager, now unemployed, found himself reflecting on his behavior and the choices he had made. He realized that being rude and dismissive had cost him not just his job, but also the respect of those around him. It was a hard lesson to learn, but one that he would never forget. And as he moved on from the cafe, he vowed to change his ways, to treat people with kindness and respect, no matter who they were or what they looked like. Because he had learned the hard way that you never know who someone really is, and that a little kindness can go a long way. After losing his job at the cafe, the manager found himself in a difficult position. He had been so focused on running the place his way that he hadn't considered what would happen if it all fell apart. Now, with no job and a tarnished reputation, he felt lost. He spent the first few days at home, avoiding people and replaying the events in his mind. The way he had spoken to the woman, the way he had treated her, it all haunted him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had brought this on himself. Meanwhile, the cafe continued to struggle. The bad review had spread quickly, and customers were staying away. The owner tried to salvage the situation by offering discounts and promotions, but it wasn't enough. The damage had been done, and it would take more than a few deals to win back the trust of the public. The manager, now jobless, knew he had to do something. He couldn't just sit around and wallow in self-pity. He decided to start looking for a new job, but it wasn't easy. Word had gotten around about what had happened at the cafe, and potential employers were hesitant to hire him. He began to realize just how much his actions had cost him, not just his job, but his entire career. One day, as he was walking through the city, he passed by the cafe. He stopped for a moment, looking through the window. The place that had once been bustling with customers was now almost empty. A few people sat at tables, but the energy was gone. He felt a pang of guilt as he watched the staff moving slowly, their expressions dull. He had done this. His behavior had driven customers away and hurt the people who worked there. As he stood there, lost in thought, he noticed a familiar face inside the cafe. It was the woman, the food critic. She was sitting at a table, sipping a cup of coffee and writing in her notebook. His heart raced as he watched her. He wanted to go in, to apologize, to explain himself, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. What would he even say? How could he make things right after what he had done? Instead, he turned and walked away, his mind racing. He knew he had to do something, but he didn't know what. He couldn't undo the past, but maybe he could find a way to make amends. He just didn't know where to start. Over the next few days, the manager began to reflect on his behavior. He thought about the way he had treated people, not just the food critic, but his employees and other customers as well. He had always been so focused on running the cafe efficiently that he had forgotten about the human side of things. He had been rude, dismissive, and arrogant, and it had cost him everything. He realized that if he wanted to move forward, he needed to change. He couldn't keep living the way he had been. He needed to learn how to treat people with kindness and respect, no matter who they were or what they wanted. It wasn't going to be easy, but he knew it was the only way. One evening, as he was sitting in his small apartment, he had an idea. He decided to write a letter to the food critic. He didn't know if she would read it or if it would make any difference, but he felt like he had to try. He sat down at his desk and began to write, pouring out his thoughts and feelings onto the page. He started by apologizing for his behavior. He admitted that he had been wrong to treat her the way he had, and that he regretted his actions. He explained that he had been so focused on running the cafe that he had lost sight of what was important. He told her how much her review had affected him, and how it had made him realize the impact of his behavior. He also wrote about the consequences he had faced, losing his job, struggling to find a new one, and seeing the cafe he had once been so proud of fall apart. He didn't try to make excuses for himself, he simply wanted her to know that he understood the gravity of what he had done. When he finished the letter, he read it over carefully. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. He folded it neatly, put it in an envelope, and wrote the food critic's name on the front. He didn't know her address, but he knew the name of the publication she worked for. He decided to send it there, hoping it would reach her. The next morning, he went to the post office and mailed the letter. As he dropped it into the mailbox, he felt a sense of relief. He didn't know if it would make a difference, but he felt like he had taken a step in the right direction. A few days later, the manager received a response. It wasn't from the food critic herself, but from her assistant. The letter was short and to the point. It thanked him for his apology and said that the critic had read his letter. It also mentioned that she appreciated his honesty and willingness to take responsibility for his actions. The manager felt a glimmer of hope as he read the letter. It wasn't much, but it was something. He knew he still had a long way to go, but he felt like he was on the right path. Over the next few weeks, the manager continued to reflect on his behavior and work on changing his ways. He started volunteering at a local community center, helping to serve meals to those in need. It was a humbling experience, and it reminded him of the importance of treating people with kindness and respect. He also began to reach out to his former employees, apologizing for the way he had treated them. Some were hesitant to forgive him, but others appreciated his efforts to make amends. He knew he couldn't undo the past, but he was determined to do better in the future. As time went on, the manager began to feel like he was making progress. He still struggled with his temper at times, but he was learning to control it. He was also learning to listen to others and consider their feelings, something he had never done before. One day, as he was leaving the community center, he ran into the food critic. She was there to write a piece about the center's work, and she recognized him immediately. He felt a surge of nervousness as she approached him, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Hello," she said, her tone neutral. "I didn't expect to see you here." He nodded, trying to find the right words. "I've been volunteering here for a few weeks," he said. "It's been eye-opening." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I read your letter," she said. "It was unexpected." He took a deep breath. "I meant every word," he said. "I know I can't undo what I did, but I'm trying to do better. I'm trying to be a better person." She was silent for a moment, then nodded again. "That's good to hear," she said. "Change isn't easy, but it's possible. I hope you keep at it." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, feeling a mix of emotions. He knew he still had a long way to go, but her words gave him hope. He had made mistakes, but he was determined to learn from them and become a better person. As he left the community center that day, he felt a sense of purpose. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he was on the right path. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was moving forward. The manager's encounter with the food critic at the community center left him feeling both hopeful and determined. Her words, though brief, had struck a chord with him. She hadn't forgiven him outright, but she hadn't dismissed him either. It was a small step, but it was enough to keep him motivated. He knew he couldn't change the past, but he could shape his future, and he was committed to doing just that. Over the next few weeks, the manager threw himself into his volunteer work at the community center. He started arriving early and staying late, helping wherever he was needed. Whether it was serving meals, organizing donations, or simply talking to the people who came in, he gave it his all. The work was humbling, and it gave him a new perspective on life. He began to see the value in small acts of kindness and the impact they could have on others. One day, as he was serving lunch, he noticed a young man sitting alone at one of the tables. The man looked tired and worn out, his clothes dirty and his face unshaven. The manager approached him with a plate of food and a smile. "Here you go," he said, placing the plate in front of him. "I hope you enjoy it." The young man looked up, surprised by the kindness in the manager's voice. "Thank you," he said quietly, his eyes filled with gratitude. The manager hesitated for a moment, then sat down across from him. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. The young man shook his head, and the two of them began to talk. The manager learned that the young man had been homeless for several months after losing his job and being unable to pay his rent. He had been struggling to find work and had been relying on places like the community center to get by. As they talked, the manager felt a pang of guilt. He realized that he had been so focused on his own problems that he hadn't taken the time to truly understand the struggles of others. He had been quick to judge and slow to listen, and it had cost him dearly. "I'm sorry you're going through this," the manager said sincerely. "But you're not alone. There are people here who care about you and want to help." The young man nodded, his eyes filling with tears. "Thank you," he said again, his voice choked with emotion. The manager stayed with him for a while longer, offering words of encouragement and support. When he finally got up to leave, he felt a sense of fulfillment that he hadn't felt in a long time. He realized that helping others wasn't just about giving them food or shelter, it was about showing them that they mattered, that they were seen and valued. As the days went by, the manager began to form connections with the people at the community center. He listened to their stories, shared in their struggles, and celebrated their small victories. He found joy in the simple act of being there for someone, and it gave him a sense of purpose that he had been missing. One evening, as he was leaving the center, he ran into the food critic again. She was there to follow up on her previous article, and she seemed surprised to see him still volunteering. "You're still here," she said, her tone neutral but not unkind. He nodded. "I've been coming here regularly," he said. "It's been good for me." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I can see that," she said. "You seem different." He smiled faintly. "I'm trying to be," he said. "I've made a lot of mistakes, but I'm learning from them. I'm trying to be better." She was silent for a moment, then nodded again. "That's good," she said. "Change isn't easy, but it's worth it." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, feeling a mix of emotions. He knew he still had a long way to go, but her words gave him hope. He had made mistakes, but he was determined to learn from them and become a better person. As he left the community center that day, he felt a sense of purpose. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he was on the right path. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was moving forward. Over the next few weeks, the manager continued to volunteer at the community center, but he also began to take steps to rebuild his career. He reached out to former colleagues and mentors, explaining what had happened and expressing his desire to change. Some were skeptical, but others were willing to give him a second chance. One day, he received a call from a friend who owned a small restaurant in another part of the city. The friend had heard about what had happened at the cafe and was hesitant to hire him, but he was willing to give him a chance, on one condition. "I'll give you a job," the friend said, "but you have to prove to me that you've changed. I can't have someone working here who's going to drive customers away." The manager nodded, even though his friend couldn't see him. "I understand," he said. "And I'll do whatever it takes to prove myself." The next day, the manager started his new job at the restaurant. It was a smaller place than the cafe, with a more relaxed atmosphere, but it was a fresh start. He was determined to make the most of it. From the very beginning, he made an effort to treat everyone with kindness and respect. He listened to his coworkers, took feedback from customers, and worked hard to create a positive environment. It wasn't always easy, old habits die hard, but he was committed to doing better. One evening, as he was closing up the restaurant, he noticed a familiar face sitting at one of the tables. It was the food critic. She was there with a friend, enjoying a meal and chatting quietly. The manager felt a surge of nervousness, but he forced himself to stay calm. He approached her table with a smile. "Good evening," he said. "I hope you're enjoying your meal." She looked up, surprised to see him. "I am, thank you," she said. "It's been a lovely evening." He nodded, feeling a sense of relief. "I'm glad to hear that," he said. "If there's anything else you need, please don't hesitate to ask." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you," she said. "I will." As he walked away, he felt a sense of accomplishment. He knew he still had a long way to go, but he was making progress. He had made mistakes, but he was learning from them and becoming a better person. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. The manager's new job at the small restaurant was a fresh start, and he was determined to make the most of it. He knew he had been given a second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. Every day, he made a conscious effort to be kind, patient, and understanding, qualities that had been sorely lacking in his previous role. It wasn't always easy. Old habits would sometimes creep in, and he'd catch himself slipping back into his old ways. But each time, he'd stop, take a deep breath, and remind himself of the lessons he had learned. The restaurant's owner, his friend, kept a close eye on him at first. He wanted to make sure the manager had truly changed and wasn't just putting on an act. But as the weeks went by, it became clear that the manager was sincere in his efforts. He treated the staff with respect, listened to customer feedback, and worked hard to create a welcoming atmosphere. Slowly but surely, the owner began to trust him more. One evening, as the restaurant was winding down for the night, the owner approached the manager. "You've been doing a great job," he said. "I wasn't sure at first, but you've proven yourself. I'm glad I gave you a chance." The manager felt a swell of pride at the words. "Thank you," he said. "That means a lot to me. I'm just trying to do better." The owner nodded. "Keep it up," he said. "You're on the right track." The manager's confidence grew as the days went by. He began to feel like he was finally finding his footing again. But he knew he couldn't become complacent. He had to keep working on himself, keep striving to be better. And he knew there was still one person he needed to make things right with, the food critic. She had been coming to the restaurant regularly, often with friends or colleagues. The manager always made sure to greet her warmly and ensure she had everything she needed. But he wanted to do more. He wanted to show her that he had truly changed, that he wasn't the same person who had treated her so poorly all those months ago. One evening, as she was finishing her meal, the manager approached her table. "I hope everything was to your liking," he said, his tone polite and respectful. She looked up and smiled. "It was, thank you," she said. "The food was excellent, as always." He hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "I know I've said this before, but I want to apologize again for how I treated you at the cafe," he said. "I was wrong, and I've been working hard to change. I just wanted you to know that." She studied him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "I appreciate that," she said. "And I can see that you've changed. It's not easy to admit when you're wrong and take steps to fix it. I respect that." He felt a wave of relief at her words. "Thank you," he said. "That means a lot to me." She nodded. "Keep doing what you're doing," she said. "It's not easy, but it's worth it." With that, she stood up and left, leaving the manager standing there, feeling a mix of emotions. He knew he still had a long way to go, but her words gave him hope. He had made mistakes, but he was determined to learn from them and become a better person. As the weeks went by, the manager continued to work hard at the restaurant. He formed strong relationships with his co-workers and earned the trust of the customers. He even began to take on more responsibilities, helping with the menu and suggesting new dishes. The owner was impressed with his dedication and began to rely on him more and more. One day, the owner called him into his office. "I've been thinking," he said. "I'm planning to open a new restaurant in a few months, and I'd like you to be the manager. You've proven yourself here, and I think you'd do a great job." The manager felt a surge of excitement at the words. "Thank you," he said. "I'd be honored." The owner nodded. "You've earned it," he said. "Just keep doing what you're doing." The manager left the office feeling a sense of accomplishment. He had worked hard to turn his life around, and it was paying off. But he knew he couldn't let his guard down. He had to keep striving to be better, to learn from his mistakes and grow as a person. As the weeks went by, the manager began to prepare for his new role. He spent hours researching and planning, determined to make the new restaurant a success. He also continued to volunteer at the community center, finding joy in helping others and giving back to the community. One evening, as he was leaving the center, he ran into the food critic again. She was there to write a follow-up article, and she seemed pleased to see him. "You're still here," she said, her tone warm. He nodded. "I've been coming here regularly," he said. "It's been good for me." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I can see that," she said. "You seem different." He smiled faintly. "I'm trying to be," he said. "I've made a lot of mistakes, but I'm learning from them. I'm trying to be better." She was silent for a moment, then nodded again. "That's good," she said. "Change isn't easy, but it's worth it." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, feeling a mix of emotions. He knew he still had a long way to go, but her words gave him hope. He had made mistakes, but he was determined to learn from them and become a better person. As he left the community center that day, he felt a sense of purpose. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he was on the right path. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was moving forward. Over the next few weeks, the manager continued to prepare for his new role. He spent hours researching and planning, determined to make the new restaurant a success. He also continued to volunteer at the community center, finding joy in helping others and giving back to the community. One evening, as he was leaving the center, he ran into the food critic again. She was there to write a follow-up article, and she seemed pleased to see him. "You're still here," she said, her tone warm. He nodded. "I've been coming here regularly," he said. "It's been good for me." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I can see that," she said. "You seem different." He smiled faintly. "I'm trying to be," he said. "I've made a lot of mistakes, but I'm learning from them. I'm trying to be better." She was silent for a moment, then nodded again. "That's good," she said. "Change isn't easy, but it's worth it." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, feeling a mix of emotions. He knew he still had a long way to go, but her words gave him hope. He had made mistakes, but he was determined to learn from them and become a better person. As he left the community center that day, he felt a sense of purpose. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he was on the right path. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was moving forward. Over the next few weeks, the manager continued to prepare for his new role. He spent hours researching and planning, determined to make the new restaurant a success. He also continued to volunteer at the community center, finding joy in helping others and giving back to the community. One evening, as he was leaving the center, he ran into the food critic again. She was there to write a follow-up article, and she seemed pleased to see him. "You're still here," she said, her tone warm. He nodded. "I've been coming here regularly," he said. "It's been good for me." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I can see that," she said. "You seem different." He smiled faintly. "I'm trying to be," he said. "I've made a lot of mistakes, but I'm learning from them. I'm trying to be better." She was silent for a moment, then nodded again. "That's good," she said. "Change isn't easy, but it's worth it." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, feeling a mix of emotions. He knew he still had a long way to go, but her words gave him hope. He had made mistakes, but he was determined to learn from them and become a better person. As he left the community center that day, he felt a sense of purpose. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he was on the right path. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was moving forward. The manager's life was slowly but surely coming back together. His new role as the manager of the upcoming restaurant filled him with a sense of purpose, and he poured his heart into the preparations. He spent long hours brainstorming ideas for the menu, designing the layout, and training the staff. He wanted everything to be perfect, not just for the customers, but for himself. This was his chance to prove that he had truly changed, that he could lead with kindness and humility rather than arrogance and control. Meanwhile, he continued volunteering at the community center. It had become a grounding force in his life, a place where he could step away from the pressures of work and focus on helping others. The people there had come to know him well, and he had formed genuine connections with many of them. They didn't see him as the rude, dismissive man he used to be, they saw him as someone who cared, someone who was trying to make a difference. One afternoon, as he was serving meals at the center, he noticed a familiar face in the line. It was the young man he had spoken to weeks ago, the one who had been struggling with homelessness. The man looked cleaner and more put together now, and there was a spark of hope in his eyes that hadn't been there before. The manager smiled as he handed him a plate of food. "It's good to see you again," he said. "How have you been?" The young man returned the smile. "Better," he said. "I found a job, thanks to the help I got here. It's not much, but it's a start." The manager felt a swell of pride. "That's great to hear," he said. "I'm really happy for you." The young man nodded. "Thanks," he said. "And thank you for talking to me that day. It meant a lot." The manager felt a lump in his throat. He hadn't realized how much that conversation had meant to the young man. It was a reminder that even small acts of kindness could have a big impact. As the weeks went by, the manager's new restaurant began to take shape. The owner was impressed with his dedication and attention to detail, and the staff respected him for his fair and supportive leadership. He made a point to listen to their ideas and concerns, something he had never done in his previous role. He wanted everyone to feel valued and heard, and it showed in the way they worked together. One evening, as the restaurant was nearing its opening day, the manager received a surprise visit from the food critic. She walked in just as he was finishing up for the night, and he felt a mix of nervousness and excitement when he saw her. "I heard about the new restaurant," she said, her tone friendly. "I thought I'd stop by and see how things were coming along." He smiled, trying to hide his nerves. "We're almost ready," he said. "Would you like a tour?" She nodded, and he led her through the space, explaining the concept and pointing out the details he had worked so hard on. She listened attentively, asking questions and offering feedback. When they reached the dining area, she turned to him with a smile. "It looks great," she said. "You've really put a lot of thought into this." He felt a surge of pride at her words. "Thank you," he said. "It's been a lot of work, but I'm really proud of how it's turning out." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I can tell," she said. "You've come a long way." He felt a wave of emotion at her words. "I'm trying," he said. "I know I've made mistakes, but I'm doing my best to learn from them." She smiled. "That's all anyone can ask for," she said. "Keep it up." With that, she left, leaving the manager standing there, feeling a mix of emotions. He knew he still had a lot to prove, but her words gave him hope. He had made mistakes, but he was determined to learn from them and become a better person. The day of the restaurant's grand opening finally arrived, and the manager felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. He had worked so hard to get to this point, and he wanted everything to go perfectly. The staff was buzzing with energy, and the owner was there to lend his support. As the doors opened and the first customers began to arrive, the manager felt a sense of pride. The restaurant looked beautiful, the food was delicious, and the atmosphere was warm and welcoming. He made a point to greet every customer personally, thanking them for coming and ensuring they had everything they needed. As the evening went on, the restaurant filled up with happy customers, and the manager felt a sense of accomplishment. He had worked hard to turn his life around, and it was paying off. But he knew he couldn't let his guard down. He had to keep striving to be better, to learn from his mistakes and grow as a person. One of the customers that evening was the food critic. She had come with a group of friends, and the manager made sure to give them the best service possible. When she left, she stopped to thank him. "Everything was wonderful," she said. "The food, the service, the atmosphere, it was all perfect." He felt a swell of pride at her words. "Thank you," he said. "That means a lot to me." She smiled. "You've earned it," she said. "Keep up the good work." With that, she left, leaving the manager standing there, feeling a mix of emotions. He knew he still had a long way to go, but her words gave him hope. He had made mistakes, but he was determined to learn from them and become a better person. As the weeks went by, the restaurant continued to thrive. The manager's leadership style had created a positive and supportive environment, and the staff worked together seamlessly. Customers raved about the food and the service, and the restaurant quickly became a popular spot in the city. The manager continued to volunteer at the community center, finding joy in helping others and giving back to the community. He had come a long way from the man he used to be, and he was proud of the person he was becoming. One evening, as he was leaving the center, he ran into the food critic again. She was there to write a follow-up article, and she seemed pleased to see him. "You're still here," she said, her tone warm. He nodded. "I've been coming here regularly," he said. "It's been good for me." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I can see that," she said. "You seem different." He smiled faintly. "I'm trying to be," he said. "I've made a lot of mistakes, but I'm learning from them. I'm trying to be better." She was silent for a moment, then nodded again. "That's good," she said. "Change isn't easy, but it's worth it." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, feeling a mix of emotions. He knew he still had a long way to go, but her words gave him hope. He had made mistakes, but he was determined to learn from them and become a better person. As he left the community center that day, he felt a sense of purpose. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he was on the right path. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was moving forward. The success of the new restaurant brought the manager a sense of fulfillment he hadn't felt in years. Customers praised the food, the atmosphere, and the service, and the restaurant quickly became a favorite spot in the city. But for the manager, the real victory wasn't just in the restaurant's success, it was in the way he had changed as a person. He had learned to lead with kindness, to listen to others, and to value the people around him. It was a far cry from the man he used to be, and he was proud of the progress he had made. However, life has a way of testing even the most determined individuals. Just as things seemed to be going smoothly, a new challenge arose. One evening, as the restaurant was bustling with customers, a group of diners began to complain loudly about their food. The manager, who had been in the kitchen overseeing the final touches on a new dish, heard the commotion and immediately went to address the situation. He approached the table with a calm and respectful demeanor. "I'm sorry to hear you're not satisfied," he said. "Can you tell me what's wrong so we can make it right?" One of the diners, a middle-aged man with a stern expression, pointed at his plate. "This is not what I ordered," he said sharply. "And even if it was, it's overcooked and tasteless." The manager took a deep breath, reminding himself to stay patient. "I apologize for the mistake," he said. "Let me have the kitchen prepare a new dish for you right away. And please, allow me to offer you a complimentary dessert as well." The man's expression softened slightly, but he still seemed annoyed. "Fine," he said. "But this is unacceptable." The manager nodded and quickly returned to the kitchen to relay the order. He made sure the new dish was prepared perfectly and personally brought it out to the table. "Here you go," he said, placing the plate in front of the man. "I hope this is more to your liking." The man took a bite and nodded reluctantly. "It's better," he said. "But this shouldn't have happened in the first place." The manager forced a smile, though he felt a pang of frustration. "You're absolutely right," he said. "And I'll make sure it doesn't happen again. Thank you for bringing it to my attention." As he walked away, he felt a mix of emotions. He knew he had handled the situation professionally, but it still bothered him. He had worked so hard to create a positive environment, and incidents like this made him question whether he was doing enough. Later that evening, as the restaurant was closing, the manager sat down with the staff to discuss what had happened. "We need to be more careful with orders," he said. "Mistakes like this can cost us customers, and we can't afford that." The staff nodded, but one of the servers spoke up. "I know we messed up," she said. "But that guy was really rude. It's hard to stay calm when people talk to us like that." The manager sighed. "I get it," he said. "But we can't control how people behave. All we can do is control how we respond. If we stay calm and professional, we can turn a negative situation into a positive one." The staff nodded again, and the manager felt a sense of pride in their willingness to learn and improve. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to do more to support them. He realized that being a good leader wasn't just about fixing problems, it was about creating an environment where everyone felt valued and supported. Over the next few days, the manager made a conscious effort to check in with the staff more often. He asked how they were doing, listened to their concerns, and offered words of encouragement. He also implemented new training sessions to help them handle difficult customers and improve their communication skills. One evening, as he was leaving the restaurant, he ran into the food critic again. She had come in for dinner with a friend, and she seemed pleased with the experience. "Everything was wonderful," she said. "The food, the service, it was all perfect." He felt a swell of pride at her words. "Thank you," he said. "That means a lot to me." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "You've come a long way," she said. "I can see the difference in how you handle things now." He smiled faintly. "I'm trying," he said. "I know I've made mistakes, but I'm doing my best to learn from them." She smiled. "That's all anyone can ask for," she said. "Keep it up." With that, she left, leaving the manager standing there, feeling a mix of emotions. He knew he still had a lot to prove, but her words gave him hope. He had made mistakes, but he was determined to learn from them and become a better person. As the weeks went by, the restaurant continued to thrive. The manager's leadership style had created a positive and supportive environment, and the staff worked together seamlessly. Customers raved about the food and the service, and the restaurant quickly became a popular spot in the city. The manager continued to volunteer at the community center, finding joy in helping others and giving back to the community. He had come a long way from the man he used to be, and he was proud of the person he was becoming. One evening, as he was leaving the center, he ran into the food critic again. She was there to write a follow-up article, and she seemed pleased to see him. "You're still here," she said, her tone warm. He nodded. "I've been coming here regularly," he said. "It's been good for me." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I can see that," she said. "You seem different." He smiled faintly. "I'm trying to be," he said. "I've made a lot of mistakes, but I'm learning from them. I'm trying to be better." She was silent for a moment, then nodded again. "That's good," she said. "Change isn't easy, but it's worth it." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, feeling a mix of emotions. He knew he still had a long way to go, but her words gave him hope. He had made mistakes, but he was determined to learn from them and become a better person. As he left the community center that day, he felt a sense of purpose. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he was on the right path. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was moving forward. The manager's journey of self-improvement and redemption continued to unfold, but it wasn't without its challenges. Running a successful restaurant required constant attention, and the pressure to maintain high standards sometimes weighed heavily on him. However, he had learned to lean on his team and trust in their abilities, something he would have never done in his previous role. The staff, in turn, respected him for his humility and willingness to listen. It was a far cry from the days when he ruled with an iron fist, and he was grateful for the change. One evening, as the restaurant was winding down after a busy night, the manager noticed one of the newer servers looking visibly upset. She was a young woman in her early 20s, and she had been doing well so far. But tonight, something was clearly bothering her. The manager approached her cautiously, not wanting to intrude but also wanting to help. "Hey," he said gently. "Is everything okay? You seem a little off tonight." The server hesitated, then sighed. "It's just, one of the customers was really rude to me earlier," she said. "I tried to stay calm, but it just got to me." The manager nodded, understanding exactly how she felt. "I'm sorry that happened," he said. "I know how hard it can be to deal with difficult customers. But you handled it well, and I'm proud of you for that." The server looked up, surprised by his words. "Really?" she asked. "Really," he said with a smile. "You're doing a great job, and I want you to know that I'm here to support you. If you ever need to talk or if something like this happens again, don't hesitate to let me know." The server smiled faintly. "Thank you," she said. "That means a lot." The manager felt a sense of satisfaction as he walked away. He had once been the kind of person who would have dismissed her concerns or blamed her for the situation. But now, he understood the importance of empathy and support. It was a small moment, but it reminded him of how far he had come. As the weeks went by, the restaurant continued to thrive, but the manager knew he couldn't become complacent. He was always looking for ways to improve, both for the business and for himself. He started attending workshops on leadership and customer service, eager to learn new skills and perspectives. He also made an effort to stay connected with the community, not just through his volunteer work but by supporting local events and initiatives. One day, the owner of the restaurant approached him with an idea. "I've been thinking," he said. "We should host a charity event here. Something to give back to the community and show our appreciation for their support." The manager liked the idea immediately. "That's a great idea," he said. "We could do a fundraiser or maybe even a free meal night for those in need." The owner nodded. "Exactly," he said. "I'll leave the planning to you. Let's make it something special." The manager threw himself into planning the event, determined to make it a success. He reached out to local organizations and volunteers, including the community center where he had spent so much time. Together, they came up with a plan for a community dinner night, where anyone in need could come and enjoy a free, warm meal. The restaurant would cover the costs, and the staff would volunteer their time to help serve. The night of the event arrived, and the restaurant was transformed into a welcoming space filled with laughter and conversation. The manager moved through the crowd, greeting people and making sure everything was running smoothly. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment as he watched families, seniors, and individuals from all walks of life come together to share a meal. At one point, he noticed the food critic sitting at a table, chatting with some of the guests. She had come to cover the event for her publication, and she seemed genuinely impressed by what she saw. The manager approached her table, feeling a mix of nervousness and pride. "I'm glad you could make it," he said. "I hope everything is to your liking." She smiled. "It's wonderful," she said. "This is such a great idea, and it's clear how much effort you've put into it." He felt a swell of pride at her words. "Thank you," he said. "It's been a team effort, and I'm really proud of everyone involved." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "You've come a long way," she said. I can see the difference in how you handle things now. He smiled faintly. I'm trying, he said. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm doing my best to learn from them. She smiled. That's all anyone can ask for, she said. Keep it up. With that, she turned back to her conversation, leaving the manager standing there, feeling a mix of emotions. He knew he still had a lot to prove, but her words gave him hope. He had made mistakes, but he was determined to learn from them and become a better person. As the event came to an end, the manager felt a deep sense of satisfaction. It had been a success, not just in terms of the number of people who had attended, but in the way it had brought the community together. He knew there would always be challenges ahead, but he felt more prepared than ever to face them. The next day, as he was going through the feedback from the event, he received a call from the owner. I just wanted to say how proud I am of you, the owner said. You've done an amazing job, not just with the event, but with everything. I knew giving you a second chance was the right decision. The manager felt a lump in his throat. Thank you, he said. That means a lot to me. The owner chuckled. You've earned it, he said. Keep up the good work. As the weeks went by, the manager continued to focus on improving himself and the restaurant. He knew he couldn't change the past, but he was determined to make the most of the present and build a better future. He had learned that true success wasn't just about running a profitable business, it was about creating a positive impact on the people around him. One evening, as he was leaving the restaurant, he ran into the food critic again. She had come in for dinner with a friend, and she seemed pleased with the experience. Everything was wonderful, she said. The food, the service, it was all perfect. He felt a swell of pride at her words. Thank you, he said. That means a lot to me. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. You've come a long way, she said. I can see the difference in how you handle things now. He smiled faintly. I'm trying, he said. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm doing my best to learn from them. She smiled. That's all anyone can ask for, she said. Keep it up. With that, she left, leaving the manager standing there, feeling a mix of emotions. He knew he still had a long way to go, but her words gave him hope. He had made mistakes, but he was determined to learn from them and become a better person. As he left the restaurant that day, he felt a sense of purpose. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he was on the right path. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was moving forward.